What's up everybody, blessed be, my name is Mannun and you're watching Witch in the Working, where we will be discussing all things witchy in and around, throughout and about, above, below and beyond. So, dude, seems like a few weeks ago I was just doing a video on Midsummer and now bang, here we are already at Lughnasah. Unbelievable. What? What's up? You want to say something? I mean, come on over, my camera's your camera. So, what's going on? What's so friggin' important? It's called Lammas. Well, some people call it Lammas. Well, that's actually the Christianized version, but...
Lammas.
Oh, brother.
Can I say it? Can I say it? Can I?
Go ahead. Roll intro. So welcome back everybody, sorry about that, he can be pretty set in his ways.
Lammas.
Anyways, as you can see, in this episode we're going to be talking about Lughnasah or Lammas, whichever you decide to call it. So Lughnasah is one of the greater sabbats that takes place on either the August 1st or 2nd, depending on how you celebrate. Lughnasah is the first of 3 sabbats, which include Lughnasah, Mabon, or the Autumnal Equinox and Samhain. So the word Lughnasah comes to us from an old Irish word which meant August. This sabbat will in particular honor the Sun God Lugh, but in fact this is a harvest festival and it mainly dances around the harvest of some of the first grains that grow in the northern hemisphere, such as corn, wheat, and barley. In ancient Phoenicia, this particular sabbat honored the god Dagon, who was a grain god, and his followers would offer up large portion of bounty as a sacrifice to him. Here in North America, some Native Americans would celebrate a festival around this time that honored the corn grandmother, and the festival was called green corn. A holiday called Cerealia was annually observed by the ancient Romans, in which they would honor their grain goddess Ceres around this time. A few other names for this sabbat, as AJ pointed out, is Lammas, First Harvest, and August Eve. As I mentioned earlier, Lammas is actually the Anglo-Saxon term that was brought about much later as a sort of Christianized version of this holiday, and in fact translates to loaf mass. As mentioned, this sabbat is mainly in honor of the Irish sun god Lugh. Lugh literally translates to the Shining One. Lugh was honored for having many great skills, including that of metallurgy. He was known to be able to show up in human form amongst the Druids, and in fact was one of their main deities. Lugh was also known to be the protector of the sick and feeble and warrior and defender of the weak. He was also the king of the Tuatha De Danann, which was an ancient race that was believed in and embraced by the ancient Celts. Like most of the gods, Lugh also had a consort whom went by the name of Dana, the first great goddess of Ireland. Although this sabbat largely revolves around Lugh, the sun god and god of the harvest, it also incorporates and venerates his queen Dana. Many pagans in early times would perform rituals that involved the sacrificial death of Lugh and his rebirth as a sheaf of grain. Many of the first fruits of autumn are harvested at this time, including corn, wheat, potatoes, turnips, summer squash, and oats, and a lot of these portions were also thrown back to the land as a sacrificial gesture and to help the cycles of the rest of the crops to grow. A lot like Midsummer, the act of fertility is still very suggestive and acknowledged during Lughnasah, as the fertility and growth of the coming autumnal crops are encouraged to grow and spring forth bounties to the families and villages. Because of this, it's common to see some of the first fruits and grains of the harvest to be revered and considered nowadays as plants of fertility. Lughnasah is a sabbat that involves sacrifice, but it has mainly always been sacrifice of fruits and vegetables. There is, however, a culture in Romania in the Transylvanian Alps that honors a tradition of marching a sow pig up the side of a mountain and sacrificing her for a good abundant harvest. Her blood must be allowed to float into the earth, and the fingers of the right hand touch the blood from the ground, and crosses are drawn on foreheads for blessings and protection. To this day, this ritual is still observed in the Carpathian Mountains, unable to be stifled by the Catholic Church, even though nowadays the sacrifice is more for thanks and prayer to the Christian God, but the peasants even nowadays, deep in their hearts, believe that their crops will be blighted if this ritual isn't performed. Some modern day Wicca covens have found a way to practice this ritual, though it's done without the blood sacrifice. Some even go as far as bringing a small pig or even a guinea pig as a representation into a circle. Instead of actually slaughtering the animal, red wine is used and poured out onto the earth in the same manner as the blood. The sow has been a major symbolic symbol of the goddess in almost every single culture in the world. Roosters are another animal that have long been sacred to the many sun gods for obvious reasons. Our ancestors would begin the process of threshing of the grain from the actual straw the day after Lughnasah. This was in fact observed as a magical task, not just a mundane practice. This would be done in special buildings called threshing houses, and these houses were also believed to contain and be guarded by special deities. As such, their symbols would be painted and carved onto and into the walls. This is where we get the custom of carrying a bride over the threshold with newly married couples as a small fertility tradition. Pagans today will still mimic this old tradition by having newly hand-fested couples jump over a broomstick for fertility blessings. It's no coincidence that many of us feel the urge to have family barbecues and gatherings during these rigorous summer months. Just as our pagan ancestors for centuries, there's tons of interesting and fun subject matters that are very pagan-y that can be used as an excuse to gather, eat, drink, and be merry with family and friends. One such practice, especially in rural areas, is to have a canning party if you're into that kind of thing. But you can also just have a good old-fashioned barbecue, but get some fresh corn on the side and have the participants husk their own corn before boiling or roasting it. The custom goes that whomever unsheathes the red corn gets to kiss the person of their choice. This custom was even followed by the Puritans in later years. Regardless of their strict views on such things, you can even create themes for these barbecues as a really fun yet hidden meaning with your party. For instance, have everybody come dressed up as the stereotypical farmers getup and bring dishes that reflect the harvest at hand. You can even create games that have to do with the harvest, all pagan friendly yet pagan active, and those none the wiser even know they're practicing in a Lughnasah celebration. Another amazing observance to do in the evenings after your kickin' Lughnasah barbecue is to do a little stargazing if your area permits it. During this time of the year, meteor showers and shooting stars are quite frequent and popular. So let's get into the nitty-gritty of Lughnasah. Some of the biggest and best feasts of any of the sabbats occur during Lughnasah. All of the first fruits and grains are consumed during the Lughnasah feasting, and part of that is even consumed in the circle, where we're sure to give plenty of offerings and libations during and after the feast to ensure the land's growth and fertility for the remaining months. If you're a Wiccan and you're performing an actual Lughnasah ritual during this time, go ahead and make your cakes and wine ritual a little different this time around. Cakes and wine is a small ritual performed usually at the end of a larger ritual, for instance, celebrating the Sabbath of Lughnasah. And it involves the high priest and high priestess of a coven blessing some red wine and cakes in symbolic gestures of ensuring fertility moving forward. The act is also performed as a libation in honor to the gods and goddesses and the land and nature spirits in that particular coven's choice. All of the participants are then offered to partake of the cakes and wine, or cakes and ale, each in turn honoring the god and goddess, nature spirits and mighty ones, for instance. So these cakes are usually moons or crescent shapes to honor the goddess. However, for this time around, go ahead and make suns in honor of Lugh, and maybe even put some orange and yellow icing to top it all off. I mean, this is a solar festival in honor of our new aging sun god, as his supreme brilliance and peak has now passed on, just coming out of Midsummer. What are some of our ancestors' ancient traditions that have been practiced throughout the centuries from all over the world? I'm glad you asked. Let's start within our own Americas. Native Americans would gather tribes together and celebrate what was called the Festival of the Green Corn. If you haven't figured it out by now, corn or maize, as it's sometimes called, is a major theme for this Sabbath and dates back as being culturally grown and harvested for like 7,000 years in both Europe and the Americas. Anyways, the Festival of Green Corn was held in honor for the corn grandmother in Native American culture, and she was believed to reside in the corn stalks of the fields. These particular festivities would last for days and would contain a lot of competition and games of skill, feasting, and obviously lots of ritual practice. Ceres, Persephone, and Demeter are three deities that were personified as corn deities at times in ancient Greece. The ancient Greeks would in essence focus these goddess energies into the body of a masculine bull, which was believed at this point to bring the total cycle of male and female together, strengthening and ensuring vast fertility amongst the peoples, animals, and crops. This bull was then sacrificed and burned as an offering to drive the energies, prayers, and wishes to the gods and goddesses, ensuring successful fertility rites. In ancient Crete, the Minoan civilization practiced a much more daring and dangerous form of traditional ritual involving a bull. They would do the same thing as the Greeks when it came to driving the essence of the goddess and feminine energies into the bull, therefore again combining the very essence of creation together with the masculine and feminine. But then they would bring the bull to a small arena area where they would take turns trying to grab the bull by the horns and vault themselves over the entirety of the bull. In doing this, they believed if successful, they were in fact conquering and dominating the gods and goddesses, therefore showing that they deserved to have a successful fertility and harvest season to come. Another practice very similar to this was practiced in ancient Wales, and it was observed and called bull dancing, and is in fact where we get the old term to, quote, take the bull by the horns. Another Sabbat that utilizes a corn-based goddess symbolism is Imbolg. During Imbolg, which occurs back around February 1st, 2nd, a corn dolly is created and dressed as the virgin goddess. She's usually dressed in all white and honored with flowers and whatnot and placed in a resting basket to be honored throughout the year. At this time, she should be removed from her basket and redressed as the pregnant goddess. Give her a full bountiful belly moving forward. It's also a common practice to make sure you hold back a piece of the corn and sheathings to create the next Imbolg virgin corn dolly, soon to be present once again at the following February. You can even place a small baby in the arms of the newly formed Lughnasah pregnant goddess figure. Use a small twist of wheat or a baby corn for this, for instance. This will give that extra punch of showing the gods and goddesses what you desire for your upcoming harvest. In Peru, corn is one of the most important food staples in the country. In this culture, they celebrate the corn harvest by putting on elaborate parades where all of the villagers dress up in their best clothes and go dancing and celebrating through the streets of the town. The elders of the villages will put small handfuls of corn into the pockets of the parade goers as the festivities progress throughout the day. At the end of the festivities, the corn that was gathered in the pockets will be taken and scattered throughout the fields as a sacrifice or sort of fertility spell, and or some may be taken home and placed in a place of honor until the next harvest. In Old Brittany, the Bretons were heavily influenced by performing sympathetic magic. Sympathetic magic is the magic of like attracts like. So the ancient Britons would take the last sheaths from the harvest and cut silhouette type figures of a pregnant goddess and then place them in the fields to ensure that the next year's harvest would be successful, fruitful, and bountiful. And this was the answer to early pesticides, crop rotation, and soil depletion. Even in India during this time of the year, cotton was treated and given the same honor as grain was throughout the European and American cultures. The first cotton to produce was taken and given honor as a cotton mother and honored through the year until the next harvest, where it was burned in sacrifice and symbolism. Many ales, whiskeys, and breads were also made and consumed during this time of the year, and of course all dedicated to the god and goddesses per a particular land. Breads are big time in the celebration of Lughnasah. It's completely traditional to bake bread using these sacred grains during the Sabbath. It has both symbolism for the god and the goddess and fertility. Per the god, it's the grain itself and the sacrifice it's making to feed our bellies and give us strength in life. As per the goddess, the baking of the bread slowly rising in the oven is symbolic of that of pregnancy, as the bread swells to completion before giving its bounty to the anxiously awaiting human consumers. Breads have been being baked throughout so many cultures for thousands of years, much older than many realize. In covens nowadays, breads are traditionally baked and passed around the coven, where people will break off a piece of bread and therefore count their blessings as they consume a piece. My coven likes to bake what we call a John Barleycorn, which is a man-shaped bread complete with penis, and he's then passed around the circle, and pieces of him are torn off and then eaten. You can imagine which part the girls always go for first. It's not pretty. Anyways, as parts of the John Barleycorn are torn off and consumed, a blessing or blessings is said out loud first by each covener. Before all of this takes place, however, a poem is read aloud ritually called John Barleycorn, and it goes something like this. There was 3 kings into the east, 3 kings both great and high, and they had sworn a solemn oath John Barleycorn should die. They took a plow and plowed him down, put clods upon his head, and they have sworn a solemn oath John Barleycorn was dead. But the cheerful spring came kindly on, and showers began to fall. John Barleycorn got up again, and sore surprised them all. The sultry sons of summer came, and he grew thick and strong, his head well armed with pointed spears, that no one should him wrong. The sober autumn entered mild when he grew wan and pale. His bending joints and drooping head showed he'd begun to fail. His color sickened more and more, he faded into age, and then his enemies began to show their deadly rage. They'd taken a weapon, long and sharp, and cut him by the knee, then tied him fast upon a cart like a rogue of forgery. They laid him down upon his back and cudgeled him full sore. They hung him up before the storm and turned him over and over. They filled up a darksome pit with water to the brim. They heaved in John Barleycorn, there let him sink or swim. They laid him out upon the floor to work him further woe, and still as signs of life appeared, they tossed him to and fro. They wasted o'er a scorching flame the marrow of his bones, but a miller used him worst of all, for he crushed him between two stones. And they had taken this very heart's blood, and drank it round and round, and still the more and more they drank, their joy did more abound. John Barleycorn was a hero bold, of noble enterprise, for if you but taste his blood, 'twill make your courage rise. 'Twill make a man forget his woe, 'twill heighten all his joy, 'twill make the widow heart to sing, though the tear were in her eye. Then let us toast John Barleycorn, each man a glass in hand, and may his great posterity never fail in old Scotland. And with that, I'm gonna go ahead and wrap up this episode of Witch in the Working. Are you going to celebrate Lughnasah or Lammas this year? If so, let us know how in the comments below. Get out there, go get some corn and boil it or roast it. Make some cornbread. So love cornbread with like honey and butter. Bake some bread, make your own John Barleycorn, whatever you see fit. Until next time, I love you guys and gals. Please hit that subscribe button below. Give me a thumbs up or down, and don't forget to ring that little bell so you're reminded of my next exciting videos coming next week. Have an awesome Lughnasah and blessed be.